From Glitch HQ on Riverside Avenue in Shaken, not stirred, Minneapolis, this is Nice Games Club, the show where nice game devs talk gaming and game development.
I'm Martha McGarry, and I make nice games.
I'm Steve McGregor, and I make nice games.
And I'm Martha Croy, and I make nice games too.
For this episode, our topics are Rumble and video game installations. And so, if everyone is ready,
let's start. Explain yourself, sir.
What?
that accent.
Oh.
It was so brilliant.
Was it? I mean, try it. I don't know. I was, 007. I was just being smooth.
Yeah, in there like swimwear.
That's how they described that.
Yeah.
Yep. It's Wednesday here.
It's Wednesday, my dude.
So we're all a little loopy, I think. This isn't when we normally would record an episode because scheduling and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Calendar math.
Calendar math has foiled us yet again.
It's the best content that you love to hear.
And it's not just Wednesday, dear listener. It's nighttime.
Yes.
Which is not normal for us either.
It's late. I'm a morning person.
So, you can skip this one if you want.
Don't tell them that.
I mean...
It's funny because we used to record episodes on Wednesdays. We were just way out of the groove on this because we haven't done it in years.
Yeah.
I'd like to think.
Are you saying there's no excuse for our behavior?
Nope. Last weekend, when we recorded this, would have been the weekend before.
It'll be 2 weeks ago from when you hear this.
Right. 2DCon happened.
Mm-hmm.
Me and Mark were showing off games.
How did it go? I want to know because I was texted you and was like, oh, yeah. Something episode schedule. You guys, how did 2DCon go? And you're like, oh, we're still here. And I was like, what?
Yeah, it was all weekend. It started on Friday at 1, I think. And then
you think, but who's to say?
Yeah, we don't know.
Was some confusion at the start time.
Yeah. It started sometime on Friday and then it went until Sunday.
Yeah.
I think it always does that, but it felt longer than in past years, I think.
I think the hours were a little longer for the 3 days. But also the space that we were in was actually open 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And so it was a little unusual because the people who were doing the other things in the room, they had PCs and consoles and arcade games set up and a VR section for people to play, a tabletop arena. It was just a large space with lots of stuff. It was really cool, actually.
Yeah.
The way they organized it a little differently and a little bit more communal than in years past. But the different events and different things, especially things that required attendance, like the VR section, whatever, they had different schedules,
right?
And so there was some people would walk by, not really caring what the schedule was, just I'm here. Is this here? I'll do it. I don't care that it closed half an hour ago.
Yeah.
And so, I never wanted to be like the bad cop to be like, no, I need to tear down.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted them to play the game.
Yeah.
So it was just it was a little rough. But a lot about it is good compared to how it used to go.
Yeah,
so it's a good sign.
It was bigger than last year, that's for sure. It was in a new venue, like Mark was saying.
Yep.
And so it didn't feel bigger than it was last year, but because
there was more space,
there was more space, so it didn't feel bigger, but I know it was bigger.
Yeah. Which means it can grow.
Yeah.
They have a contract with this hotel for the next couple of years, so it'll be back for the next few years. So it's secure, which is pretty cool. It's in downtown Minneapolis, which means I can bike there.
Yeah.
Which is cool. So I'm happy about that because the driving all the way out to whatever suburb it was previous wasn't awesome.
Right. Yeah. Bringing all your stuff over there.
Yeah. But also people travel. It's a small convention, but people still travel from throughout the Midwest or the country to come to it. So, in more of a central location means they can experience more of our fair cities. So
yeah. It's been good attendance.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really good. Yeah, and I guess as usual, 2DCon happened, and I didn't get to experience much of it.
Right, you were programming
because we were all. I was actually. I was working on Vengeance while we were there.
I mean you were programming. You were the event programming,
Oh, well, yeah.
But yes, you were. You did have your laptop out, banging away in Visual Studio.
Yeah. Oftentimes when I show off Vengeance, I will see a lot of things that I notice are bad, and they're there's small things that I can fix really quickly. And so I will be making builds throughout my time working on a thing, and I made
Well, it doesn't go exactly like that. It goes you see a thing and then you go, shoot!
Yeah. That's pretty accurate.
And then you scramble behind the TV and you're like, I'm going to fix it. Make a new build.
Yeah. Maybe not that. I'm kind of angry about it. Yeah, but like it's nice because it makes me feel productive throughout the weekend.
Yeah, that's good. I can't totally do that.
Sure.
I really wish I could because you're right. It makes you feel like you're actually really using the time well.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to be kind of eagle-eyed on the booth, and I want to like answer questions. And I also want to do a lot of observation.
Yeah.
So I'm taking notes constantly.
And to be fair, that's probably a better way of doing it. Well, I suppose it depends on where you're at. But
there's almost no, you can do, whatever you do is productive to the thing you're doing.
Yeah.
But it tends to, it drains me very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing about showing your games off is it's always draining.
Yeah.
Because you kind of have to be on.
Uh-huh.
Even when like the way I show Vengeance is not great because I oftentimes just like sit the game there and let people play it and I don't talk to them unless they have questions or like they just started and I'll introduce the game to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like even that though is still like it feels like a lot because you're kind of like you kind of have to constantly introduce yourself to new people all the time. So like it's an adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it can be draining. So
how did Vengeance show?
I feel like it did fine. There were like rewards and stuff. I don't know if Vengeance won anything because we weren't there to collect it.
We had to actually unload, so
I don't know. I know some games won some things. I think so.
They had little ballots you could vote on your favorite in a bunch of different categories.
Yeah.
I don't know who won.
I have no idea. Yeah, I'm sure the people who won.
We're all winners, really.
We're all winners. Yeah, we got to go to 2DCon.
And there was some new. So it's every year a couple games come in and come out. But there are many repeat. Like Vengeance has been at it for the last 4 years.
Yep.
That's exciting,
it's
right?
cool because like actually we didn't get to go last year because we were at Gen Con that year.
Oh, that's right.
But there's a couple of attendants who like make it their goal to play Vengeance every year
because they remember it.
Yeah,
and it's the place to play it, right?
Yeah,
it's not out yet.
I think they're vendors. I think they sell stuff there.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, so like it was really neat to see them again and see them play the game. They're like, oh, we're really sad that it wasn't there last year, but we're really excited it's here this year. So that was really nice.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. I know there's these categories of bugs in Vengeance, and we saw them, but much less than usual.
Yay!
So it's real measurable progress.
It's still the same bug that will show up for the rest of my life.
Oh no!
It's that's game dev. That's how it is sometimes.
Widget Satchel. This is the first time I've actually shown Widget Satchel at an event of this scale.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things I decided when we started working on it was like, I'm just going to like hunker down and make it.
Yeah.
Right. That was the main thing. Now, I showed off at GlitchCon last year, and that was fun. But that was a much easier, I had a much easier time of it. It was one night. It was just a couple hours.
Yeah.
But this is the first time I really showed it off in a setting that I'm used to showing off Metro Nexus in years past.
Yeah.
And so I kind of knew what to deal with, but a lot of it was actually kind of new because I've done playtests here at Glitch a lot for Widget Satchel, but I haven't been in selling mode of like explaining, here's what the game is, and big smiley face and kind of trying to make a good impression. And so that was kind of like, oh yeah, that's how that goes. Like I'd forgotten, I hadn't done it in a while.
Right.
But what was cool is that people sat down and played the game for like an hour.
Yeah.
And somebody turned to me and was like, this is the longest game I've ever played. The longest indie game I've ever played.
Wow.
And I was like, well, that's not true. Or you haven't played a lot of indie games.
Yeah.
But also it made, in a demo environment like that, it was very long.
Right.
Most people played for 3 minutes, 20 minutes, or an hour. Like there was not really, they kind of hovered in those categories.
Yeah.
So that's good because, there weren't enough bugs to send people away, which is nice. But also people were interested enough and essentially they just stopped by and then it ate up their hour. And like, that's kind of, that feels good.
That's cool.
But someone was saying just how long it was. And I was just like, oh, no one's ever described it that way. So thanks.
That's pretty great.
Yeah. But a lot of the late game stuff in the second hour, we haven't been able to get people to play test.
Yeah.
Because you can't just throw people at the end of the game. There's so much you need to know going in.
Right.
And we need to test the sort of progress. So I was like furiously taking notes for the few people who like made it all the way to the end of the game.
Yeah.
Like just to say like, okay, we haven't really play tested this before. So suddenly it became a play test. And so that was valuable.
Yeah.
And I looked at my notes and I'm like, it was so delirious. I only really understand half of them. And Monday I was destroyed, so tired, but net gain.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so while we were at 2DCon, Martha was doing something else.
What?
Oh. I mean, I hope so. You weren't just like sitting on your couch while we're not there.
No,
you were doing other things.
What was it actually doing? I don't know, but I played a lot of Civilization.
Yes.
And
you didn't just play Civilization.
I know. I didn't just play Civilization. I beat a game of Civilization.
Wow.
I know. It's very weird for me.
Yes.
Yay! Cultural victory. I was
nice.
going for it was an accidental cultural victory. I was going for a science victory, but I just happened to have so much culture that people were like, "You're cool." So, it's
That's
fine.
what people are always saying about Martha. Too bullshit.
Man, every time I've beaten Civilization, it's always been a military victory because I'm always going for a science victory. And then I just have all it's the game's taking forever and I have all these armies.
People kept declaring war on me. I was like, I'm nowhere near you. What are you doing?
Yeah, there's that. You sort of get drawn in and then you're just like, all right, fine, pew pew. And then you just win. And you're like, oh, all right. That's
Oh my goodness. This is the best description of a competitive match that Marcus played ever.
No, not competitive. This is against the computer. I'm not,
okay.
I'm not playing against humans.
You don't play against humans. Why would you do that?
No, why would you play a multiplayer game? Never.
No, you don't play against humans. You take humans to lunch and be their friend. You destroy CPU opponents.
Okay, that's fair. That makes a lot more sense, actually. Yeah. I was gonna say you're just doing that. You're just nonchalantly winning all these online games. I'm like, wow.
No, there are people like that, but no one would ever describe me that way.
That's why I was shocked.
Yeah,
but you did it, Martha. You did it. You won a game.
Yeah. Well, I think because what I usually do, if listeners haven't heard about this before, is I play Civilization really weird. I start a new game every time I start playing because I only really liked the exploration part and the beginning part of the game where there's all the possibilities and no one has built one of your wonders that you were about to build yet. And, everything's happy-go-lucky. Mm-hmm. You're defeating a bunch of barbarians and you're making the first wonders and you learn to ride horses and it's great. But now I got it on the Switch and it's totally changed my gameplay because I can play a little those computer times when I played on the PC were mega long binges where I'd play 6 hours at once.
Sure, yeah.
And then I'd be like, well, I'm done with this. And by the next time I'd play, I'd be like, I don't remember where I was. This takes lots of strategy. I'm just going to start over. But with the Switch, you can play for 10 minutes and then turn it off. And then the next time you have 10 minutes, you can play. You can play a turn or whatever. And then it turns into 4 hours, but you don't notice and as much because you can walk around with it and put it down and be like, oh, where was, it's way easier to pick back up again and just casually play. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that's what I've been doing. It's very interesting how different venues make you play the game different ways.
I've noticed that too with my habits when I'm playing on Switch versus other games. I feel like when I'm playing on Switch, I expect myself to play it in 20-minute bursts, especially since when I do it, I tend to play it on the train or something. It takes me 20 minutes to get to work and back.
And even when you're not traveling, you mostly play handheld, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah, that is the case. The only time I don't is if I'm playing it with a bunch of people or if I'm playing Smash, which is oftentimes with a bunch of people. So, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, but yeah, most of the games I get I intend to play like that in little bursts. So, I feel you on that.
I tend to play docked, so it just feels like any other console to me.
Sure.
I will play in bed, handheld.
Yeah.
Or if I don't usually take my Switch when I go places. I also don't go a lot of places, so. but to me, it's more of a dock system. So, so it doesn't. I don't have those different paradigms that a lot of people do.
Yeah.
It can be sort of different things to different people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Martha, your struggle with completing a game of Civilization, at least in the clubhouse, dates back to our pilot episode.
Oh, yeah.
Where we talked about it. So
is that the unreleased pilot?
It might be. We talked about it pretty soon in the start of the show, but that's one of the things I know about you.
It just
now you have to completely
update
rewrite
my priors.
Yeah.
Just goes to show how much we've all changed.
Yeah, I've grown as a person.
Yeah.
And as a civilization, apparently.
Mine's the best. That's what they say.
Culturally, anyways.
Yeah.
Last bit. Widget Satchel is in Japanese. We talked about it. I think we talked about it a little bit before, right?
Yeah, we talked about how the Widget Satchel has a Japanese publisher. So it'll be released with some support over there, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
Because that's definitely not something we could have swung on our own. But I just got you put this in the notes because you wanted me to talk about it.
Yeah. It's cool.
I just got the first draft of their translation back, and I implement it and testing out do all the localization features I put in work. They do. I took some screenshots and shared them in the community just because it's like exciting
Yeah.
to like see the thing that I found interesting was like when you you do your work, it's real, right? You put it in front of people, it's real. At 2DCon, when I just overheard someone say widget satchel, like as it's a thing that exists in the world now.
Yeah.
Right? When somebody else says it and you didn't tell them it first.
Yeah.
Like it's a lot of emotional like attachment to these moments of this sort of like making it feel real. And one of them turns out is when you have your game and then all of the text on screen is translated and formatted without you manually typing it in yourself.
Yeah.
Like it feels like it's a real product that has multiple hands and like it just I don't know, it's just one of those interesting moments.
Yeah,
that,
I
like,
thought it was,
oddly feels like a real thing now.
I thought it was super cool to see that. Like, I don't know, it's just neat to see all this stuff, and I didn't understand any of it, but like, it wasn't meant for me.
Yeah. Well, it's also challenging my sense of aesthetics because one of the things I see a lot of when I see, especially in pixel art games, when I see non-Latin characters, there's a rich tradition of typeface art in the Western world. Because we have the capacity for that.
Yeah.
And for non-Latin fonts, there just isn't that much of a tradition of that.
Right.
Well,
It does exist, but very frequently, especially in pixel art, there just aren't enough pixels to be.
oh, I see. In pixel art, because I'm like, there's like, Arabic calligraphy and Chinese calligraphy.
Oh, yeah.
Like that,
certainly.
playing around with typeface.
On paper, there's in fact much more of a tradition of actual proper fine art when it comes to writing systems in non-Latin scripts. You're absolutely right about that. It's like a weird thing.
Yeah, because it's like the print stuff is mostly non-Latin characters, and the online stuff is a lot more.
Yeah, well, it's super interesting about even just the creation of fonts. Like there are thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of characters that are shared with Japanese, Chinese, and in some part Korean. And those characters, and then there's a whole separate set for traditional Chinese and simplified Chinese. And all of those characters, it makes it just impractical to design a font.
Yeah.
It's just literally impractical. And so there aren't really that many. And it is kind of interesting. So you see, people are like, oh, there's like Arial and Times New Roman and like the 4 system fonts you have.
Yeah.
You'd see them on all the websites. But like in today's era of web fonts, like websites are really expressive and they feel more like desktop publishing and more designery and like really have the hand of an artist in it. And that is not come to non-Latin scripts because of just the enormity of the work. And so a lot of times when I see video games, especially ones that have been localized, there's like the one font that's available.
Yeah.
There's an open source font that Adobe and Google worked on together called Noto Sans. That's Google's name for it. Adobe calls it Source Han. And it is a really incredible work that makes those fonts accessible to everybody because they're open source. And that's really exciting. That's what I'm using in Widget Satchel. And so, but at the same time, like I couldn't pick my fonts. And that was really difficult because the title font in Widget Satchel has a really peculiar look to it. That's very a strong part of its aesthetic identity.
Right.
And so it challenged my aesthetics to be able to just use one of these fonts and not pay up for essentially the 7 that are available, which you could purchase.
Yeah.
Like there just aren't that many. And so you see a lot of this, I've been sort of circling this idea, but you see a lot of work that has a lot of these non-Latin characters in it, and they sort of sacrifice sort of like pure design graphic aesthetic for legibility, usability. Now, you tend to see like title treatments in non-Latin fonts like really be creative and interesting. Yeah. Because there's like, 7 to 10 characters you need to manage. And so anyway, so it's been challenging because I'm like, that's, it's just something I can't let go of. And so seeing this in there, and I'm satisfied with it. Yeah. Like not just that, I think it looks nice. That's good. And like a lot of that comes to things like setting the baseline values for like the way that the Latin script and the non-Latin script go together, because these non-Latin scripts will have Arabic numerals in them for one, because those are used internationally. Yeah. And also there will be times where you don't translate certain proper nouns. You just leave them in Latin script in English. That's common in Japanese in particular. And so these things will mix with each other. So these non-Latin fonts will have Latin characters in them, but the Latin characters in the non-Latin fonts tend to be kind of plain and boring. And you'll see this on websites. If you see Japanese websites, you'll see just English phrases, and they'll kind of just look gross because they're just part of that character set. So I found a way to mix the fonts I'm using in English with trying to just so
that's so cool.
Yeah, and it's fascinating stuff. It can be very technical, and if it's boring to you, then it's just really boring. But if it's all interesting to you, it's incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
Man, there was a conference in Minneapolis this week, like right now, that's happening all about font design.
Did I miss that? Oh, you told me about it, and then
I can't go to any of it, but apparently today there was a like workshop on designing hangul, which are the Korean syllabary. And oh man, I wanted to go to that, but there's like work that I have to do or something for money. So
and hangul is phonetic, right?
Yeah.
So it's like 30 characters or something like that.
Yeah, it's I don't remember, but
it's some manageable number.
Yes,
and it has a really very strong visual style that I feel like even not knowing the language, you could kind of work with.
Yeah.
So
the whole workshop apparently was on like what rules you can break and what can't you break if you don't actually know.
Oh, that's important to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, can I make this line go this way? Or is that like as a stylistic choice, or would that like totally break the meaning of it? So yeah.
And we both missed it.
I know, we both missed it.
We are the worst.
If you went to TypeCon, let us know.
Next year?
Next year. We'll go next year.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, thanks for making me talk about it.
Yeah, no,
I
it's so cool
I'm
and interesting.
Fired up.
Yeah, I knew
the screenshots are so awesome.
I actually can't wait to see what the hangul looks like, what the Korean text looks like, which satchel. That'll be fun too.
It's gonna be so cool.
Yeah. What was that?
Get ready to rumble.
Well, that amazing multimedia transition brings us to my topic, which is about Rumble in games. This is one of those just fun foundational things, and I've been working on it with just actually trying to get Rumble working in it, because it can be kind of like you can use a hammer or a scalpel in designing it.
It's true. It's very true.
And one of the things when we were putting it together, we decided is when we did the Jam version way back when.
Yeah.
I believe Lane implemented a lot of the original Rumble stuff in Widget Satchel, the Jam version. Mm-hmm. And then I think when we started working on it proper, we're like, you know what? Let's leave that alone. We'll get back to it.
Yeah.
And so, other than turning it down a little bit, we haven't really touched it until the end of the project here, where it's finally time to go back in and do all of it in one kind of pass. And that's what I've been doing. And now that the game is running on consoles and PC, all these different controllers, I'm glad I waited and did it all at once instead of just kind of piecing it together.
That's
so I'll talk a little bit about that, but first, just the sort of background. I think a lot of the history and trivia is really fascinating. Rumble as like the force feedback in video games, like it predates the Nintendo 64 Rumble Pack, which I think a lot of people understand is the first, Rumble controller. Certain arcade installation kinds of things would experiment with using haptic feedback.
Right.
Flight simulator style arcade games, things like that. The idea wasn't totally uncommon. There were joysticks that had PC joysticks that had like Rumble components in it.
I believe
they weren't super well supported.
Sure.
So it was kind of an idea that existed, but it was one of those like, oh, it's like a weird side thing that like something has, but it wasn't a mainstream idea until Nintendo brought it to Nintendo 64 with the Rumble Pack, which, if you don't know, was this little like thing you snapped into your controller. It was an accessory.
Yeah.
And it had the motor in it, and that's all it was. It was pretty simple. But the expansion port on the Nintendo 64 controller was designed to, so that you could have a lot of these crazy ideas that you add to it. Like Nintendo is famous for adding crazy ideas to its things.
Yep.
But this seemed like a really cool way to like have a platform for crazy ideas.
Yeah.
Right?
The Nintendo 64 controller was the most weird thing, but it was so cool because of how weird it was.
Yeah. So the Rumble Pack and the memory card were the two that most people know.
Yeah.
There was also an e-card reader, I believe.
I had that.
And there was a microphone attachment.
There was a Game Boy attachment. You could play Pokemon Stadium and Pokemon Stadium 2 with it and bring your own Pokemon into the game, which was kind of it wasn't great because like that game already had a bunch of default Pokemon of all of them, and they were all like level 99 or something. And your Pokemon aren't going to be that high. So they just kind of got wrecked every time.
And I didn't know about some of those things. The thing that was fascinating to me is I was just assumed it expanded on the abilities of the controller. And so the game would send the data to these devices.
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize it would be like full two-way communication. I mean, it makes sense because you need to, the inputs also send information back.
Right.
But I didn't realize how robust a platform it was.
Yeah.
Because of basically how little it was used in the mainstream. How Yeah. But that's Nintendo always over-engineers some of their things and then you don't use it completely.
Mm-hmm.
But that was really interesting. Also interesting is that there wasn't an expansion port on the GameCube controller.
Yeah.
They just gave it up, and then they had card slots on the system.
Right. Yeah. The GameCube was designed, as far as I understand, the GameCube was designed really to be like more of a hardcore machine.
Yeah.
So, like they put a bunch of power into it and stuff.
Yeah.
Instead of like those extra features like
But
they usually do.
they did have the Game Boy Advance attachment that you just use. It was basically another thing you stuck on the bottom, which was pretty great.
Mm-hmm.
We had that.
Well, I think it was
my cousin had that.
It was
I have that.
Yeah, there was still definitely still crazy ideas in the GameCube era, but it was sort of a recognition that what people used that slot for was memory cards and Rumble.
Yeah.
And memory cards didn't need to be controller centric, so you could just put them on the system. And Rumble, you could just build right in.
Yeah.
And so that was, a kind of interesting thing. So it was born out of this experiment, right? And then famously, the analog stick on the Nintendo 64 controller inspired Sony to stick a pair of analog sticks on its controller, and then that's the birth of that style of controller.
Right.
And a lot of people know the DualShock, right? That's the controller that was not introduced with the PlayStation. It came out later, but it wasn't actually the first revision of that controller. The dual analog controller was the first revision.
Oh.
It didn't have Rumble right away.
Oh.
That's why DualShock has a brand name.
Oh,
is because it was the third iteration, so they needed to give it a name.
Yeah.
Which was sort of interesting. And so that introduced two Rumble motors in the wings of the thing. And I didn't actually get the information on this, but I know this is how these controllers work now. Generally, is that the two motors? You think, oh, great, stereo effects, right?
Yeah.
But that's not what they're used for. The two motors are different. And so they have like they're these eccentric mass motors. So if you think of just like an axle, and then you think of it like a wheel, but think of just half the wheel, right?
Sure. Okay.
And so when you spin it, it's off its axis. So that's how Rumble works.
It's like if you have a misbalance of clothes in your washer and it starts going wobble, wobble, wobble.
That's
wobble,
a perfect metaphor. Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. Brilliant. And that's just how Rumble works. And so the two motors have just different shaped size masses. And so because
one you're washing sweaters and the other one you're washing t-shirts.
There you go. Because you can't get a lot of it shakes the whole controller.
Yeah.
So, but when I was starting to develop Rumble stuff, a lot of the API I was looking at left motor, right motor. I'm like, oh, of course. And I would try to I'll pan across, or if something happens on the left side of the character, it'll be on the left motor.
Yeah.
It's not how it works. And I was very disappointed.
Yeah.
But that was.
Is that why? Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No,
I'm
please.
really sorry. But is that why the Nintendo's the Switch controllers were such a big deal?
It is one of the reasons.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm jumping ahead. Continue.
So that type of Rumble motor that described as an eccentric rotating mass, that is yeah.
That is the name of that. Sorry.
I know, right?
That's amazing.
That's the standard Rumble all over the place.
Yeah.
The one of the interesting things more recently is the Xbox One controllers have the two standard Rumble motors, but they also have additional Rumbles in the triggers.
Oh, that's right.
And they call them impulse triggers. And I don't actually know exactly if they're any different, but they're definitely much more fine in terms of the sensation they give.
Right.
And the idea was supposed to be for things like racing games, like when you pull down on the trigger and it feels like pushing down on the pedal.
Oh, really?
And then it would give you feedback based on how the motor is turning, and like this idea that it would give you information that you could then use to know, like, oh, I'm taking this turn too tight, I should give it a little more gas, or
that
whatever.
Makes sense.
I don't know that a lot of racing games bother with that.
Yeah, I was gonna say this seems more like a shooting kind of thing. That's just for feel purposes.
Yes, and that kickback kind of people do use it for that. That is the case. I think a lot of AAA games will have a cursory implementation. Lower level games, especially cross-platform titles, tend not to do much with it.
Okay,
and this is of course why all exclusive features don't get done in cross-platform games, because it's extra work. And it feels almost like a Nintendo idea. There's a little extra thing they added that people didn't totally understand and seemed very specific to a certain type of game. But the Xbox One controller has some extra stuff in it. I'm not sure how much access as a developer you have to that stuff on PC. But on Windows, that controller is a first-class piece of hardware. So I haven't, that's the part I haven't really gone into it yet with Widget Satchel is working with the Xbox One controller and its extra stuff. Mostly because like there doesn't seem to be a lot of appetite and a lot of people don't even know it can do more stuff. But that's the thing about Rumble is like, it's a simple idea. It's a washing machine, right?
Yeah.
But you can do more interesting things with it. It's just the appetite for it is sort of like, I don't know. And another one of those, of course, is HD Rumble, which is a dumb title for a cool feature. High definition Rumble.
Okay.
That's Nintendo's implementation of Rumble on the Switch. And this does not use...
The Rumble has so many pixels though, Mark.
And this doesn't have the eccentric rotating mass.
Yeah.
It uses something called a linear resonant actuator.
Straight out of Star Trek.
And so what this is think of a spring in a channel, and then in the middle of the spring is a mass.
Yeah.
And there's magnetic fields will move it back and forth. You can change amplitude of that. And the HD Rumble has two, I believe. I'm not actually sure exactly how it's built, but it will do two different frequencies.
Yeah. Yep.
That can be adjusted within the frequency, but they're in these ranges, right? Yeah. So ultimately, it's basically a speaker.
Yeah,
is what it is. It works very similar to a magnetic speaker, just like your boombox has, right? The technology is almost identical. In fact, you can actually feed sound files to the controller, and it will play them.
Yeah.
And so what you can do with that is you can do an incredible amount of interesting feel that you have control over amplitude and frequency. And if you have the two controllers, you can do things like stereo effects. Not because you can actually move the thing, it's that you can imply motion in the rumble, and so it feels like it has a direction, and so you can fool the feel into thinking that it is in a particular part of the controller.
Yeah.
Nintendo has a great demo for this in the game 1-2 Switch, where you move the Joy-Con in your hand, and it feels like there's these little balls rolling around inside of it.
Right.
It's really incredible.
Yeah.
Just like with the Xbox's impulse triggers, no one really uses it for anything.
Yeah, when I developed Treasure Stack, I did try to make I did try to make good use of the product, and there's a lot of things you can do with it. I think that I made things feel really good about it. Like when you make a match in Treasure Stack with the chest, it'll make a little tiny ping sound, sort of thing. So each individual chest, you will feel them as they open up, which I thought was really neat. I don't know that people really liked it or not, but I thought it was cool.
Well, one of the things you can do, and it's looks like this is the route you went, is that you can give it just a little bit of juice, right? You can have things feel a little different. You can have, with the two motors you have in a normal controller, you can have fine rumble and rough rumble, right?
Yeah.
So Mass Effect, I think Mass Effect 2, you could made pretty good use of this when you did the mining operations. You'd circle a planet and then you'd get cues as to how close you were.
That's right.
And a little bit of what type. It was crude, but it was a good use of the limited abilities to do that sort of thing. But HD Rumble gives you so much more, but it's really hard to work with the system because it's really complicated. And I think Nintendo even acknowledges this is going to be hard for you, so don't feel bad about only doing a little bit.
Yeah.
I think that's in their documentation.
Yeah.
But one of the things you can do is you can record sound effects and then you can actually modify them to work with it, and it can give you a lot. So you can also use different libraries of these vibration effects. So you can have little tink, or you can have rumbly kind of rumble sounds for explosions and stuff like that. And so what I've been doing in Widget Satchel is I came up with a system where I have rumble type. So rumble type is just different actions in the game. So this is a landing on the ground. This is a thud type, right? Or a UI sound or something like that. All these different types of things in the game, and they're a lot of them are one-offs, but some of them can be reused. And then I abstracted in the game by saying, when it's time to make the controller rumble, I can feed it amplitude, I can say which motors to use, and then I can also say rumble type. So for the Switch version of the game, it reads that rumble type and will then play that sample. And so I can write sort of a cross-platform API that works with both systems, and without having to write it twice, and it's still really complicated.
Yeah.
As easy as you want to make it on yourself, but the results are pretty good.
Yeah.
If you just feed the normal magnitude numbers for a Switch controller, it is weird. It feels weird.
Yeah.
I don't know what experience you had.
I designed the Rumble on the Switch first and then moved on to the other stuff.
Okay, that's probably the right way to do it. Because for me, it was the other way around. I just took the values we had and just fed it to the Switch controllers and just do, and it's fine for now. I'll do better.
Yeah.
But like because of how it doesn't have, partly because the Joy-Cons are small, right? It doesn't have the sort of big motors that other controllers do.
Right.
In order to achieve that kind of effect, you need to have kind of on off kind of quality to have it seem that way. And you can do that manually by feeding like an array of values, or you can use a sample that does that, but that ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
And so, but you just by giving it a big number doesn't make it vibrate a lot. It just makes it like it's really weird. Anyway, so it's if you're just trying to get your game out the door, you still have to think about it.
Yeah.
You can't just sort of feed it default values.
Yep.
And that is something you should think about if you're porting your game to Switch. And hopefully you should be inspired to kind of do something fun with it. And even if that is just a difference between, you know, a rough kind of rumble and a sort of a tight vibration, if that's all you do, that's still the player is going to appreciate that difference. So I think that's really cool. So yeah, that's hardware stuff. So let's talk just about design, like where to put a rumble.
We can get real in the nitty gritty here.
It is hard to know because when you're developing, you just want to turn rumble off. Like you don't want
because you
don't
want
want
the controller keep going through the same thing over and over again, and your controller will constantly be rumbling.
It'll shake on the
table
desk, and it's just like there are things you can just quickly test in like the Unity editor or whatever tool you're using.
Yeah,
like that jump feels right, but like rumble is something you do have to just sit down and play the game to get a real sense for how it works, because it's very much this sort of like dimension of immersion. But basically, just like with things like screen shake or particle effects, it is really easy to overdo it.
Yep.
And sometimes the correct answer is not to have anything at all. One of the things I learned is that I can do these really subtle sound or vibrations on the Switch. Like when Sprocket is swatting their hand around before they get the wrench. It's just like a real light way to just knock stuff around. I can do a really tiny audio sample that plays on the Switch, and it feels really good.
Yeah.
But if I have the lowest possible rumble on like an Xbox One controller, it feels like too much.
Yeah.
And so I just have it set to 0 for those platforms. And that was kind of tough to like actually have different, not just like different types of things on each platform, but actually different things that will rumble or won't.
Yeah.
That was kind of a tough thing to realize that I had to do if I wanted to play in that neighborhood of the cool stuff I could do with the Switch. I had to give it more. I had to separate it even further than I thought I would have to. But like, don't do a rumble on every jump, I think.
Yeah.
Like, little things like that.
I will say that, like, because of the way that the Switch works, you can maybe get away with it if it's like really fine and precise. But like, in general,
that's the thing about Switches. You can kind of do something for everything but that's going to take more of your time than you're willing to give it is to calibrate.
Yeah, if it's
the
Switch exclusive and you're trying to really impress Nintendo, maybe do that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Definitely these things about these hardware things. Like if you have something for impulse triggers, let Xbox know.
Yeah.
Like they will be happy to hear it.
Yep.
And they might help you out a little bit. But the things, basically make it feel like every time you get hit, that's, in a shooting game, every time maybe like kick back on a gun, like a punch, like those just things that people expect your controller to shake a little bit. If you are in a cutscene and like there's a bomb goes off in the facility, or like, oh no, the ground is shaking and now you're rising into space. Like those are great ways to, just like having a subwoofer, it's like it adds a little bit more, it feels a little more real, right? Those are things you can script and work out. But also you can do things for game design stuff. You can have cues and directions. So if you're going down different hallways, you can have different rumble cues to imply things to the player. You can build a language of vibration that the player can slowly catch on to.
Yeah.
The thing you can't do or shouldn't do is rely on it for core gameplay because it's an accessibility concern.
Right.
Not just for people who, can't have rumble in their experience. They say they can't feel it or rumble is not something that is appropriate for them to manage the controller. It's for people who will not pick up on those cues because humans are different. And it's not. These are ambiguous in a certain sense.
Yeah.
And so it's not always easy for people to understand if you're trying to use it to solve puzzles. For example.
Oftentimes a lot of games will like do rumble to like say search for stuff on the ground. I think there's like a couple of moons in Super Mario Odyssey where the only way you can find the moon is by using the rumble. I mean, which is a neat way of using that feature.
It's super cool, right?
But like, not everybody can participate in that.
Yeah.
possibly for accessibility reasons, and also because, like you said, everybody is different, and so they might not be as sensitive to Rumble that Nintendo was hoping for from people.
Yeah.
So they might not be able to like find that moon easily.
Yeah, and there are people who just turn off Rumble in the settings.
Just because it's annoying.
One of them is my wife.
Yeah.
She does not like Rumble, and it's a hilarious story why. So another back to the history of Rumble in video games. When there are patents on these systems.
Yeah.
Right? But Sony lost access to the license for this sort of standard controller Rumble, or at least the type they were using in the PlayStation 2 controller when they were developing the PlayStation 3. So they shipped without Rumble. Not everyone remembers this, but and they called it the 6-axis controller.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't a DualShock, it was the 6-axis controller.
Yeah.
And one of the things they spun so hard. I remember these interviews. They were saying like, oh, yeah, Rumble is a last generation feature. We don't need that anymore. We have motion controls now.
Yeah.
We have the tilt sensors, and like one of the reasons why they maybe added the motion controls on the PS3 controller, I think in large part to compete with the upcoming Wii. That was the story that people felt was true.
Yeah.
But part of it might have been also that they were losing a headline feature, and they were also considering it for that reason, but they might have helped them make that decision because they needed something. They needed something so it didn't feel like a step back.
I do remember that now because I remember that game that coming out, and I remember their excuse was because it has motion controls. You can't have Rumble because it'll mess with the motion controls or something.
Which is funny because the first version of the PlayStation 3 controller had semi-translucent plastic shell.
Yeah.
It was black, but you can kind of see through it. It's kind of neat, actually. It wasn't like a play it loud Nintendo controller, but you could hold it up to the light and it would shine through.
Yeah.
And you could see these big empty cavities in the handles. Still, like, there was room for those motors. And of course, within I think a year, it wasn't that long, they released the DualShock 3. Yeah. And the funny thing about it is that my PS3 was one of the launch ones, and it had that controller, and that's how Dale learned how to use those controllers when she played Portal 2.
Oh.
And that became her controller.
Yeah.
Was the one because she didn't like Rumble.
Okay.
And so if she had started playing those games with DualShock 3, she might have just been fine with it. But because she sort of got attached to that, now she just turns it off in every game she plays. Oh. And I think it's ridiculous.
That's fascinating.
But like that's just the way she plays. She just turns it off if she's able to. And so when we got a PlayStation 4, she was like, does one come without Rumble? I'm like, no, you can turn it off if you want to. She's like, does one come without it? I'm like, no. And then I started explaining the story, and she's like, boring. So as weird a reason as that is for a person to not have Rumble, those people exist. Yeah. Right? And that's a weird reason, in spite of, my wife being the smartest person I know. So like, it's, you're not going to be able to know why, and you can't count those people out. Right. You can't be like, well, if they don't do it, then like they're not playing my game right. Like that's not true. Like, so you got to account for those. Yeah. Those sort of
totally.
Yeah. Which is like, especially if you come with like a cool idea to use Rumble, it can be kind of disheartening. Yeah. But like just with like things like doing things for colorblindness, like if you are able to not just turn Rumble off, but like have a mode where if your gameplay depends on it or relies on it or uses it in an interesting way, they consider having a mode which does something else in its place. Yeah. And maybe that's not as good of a design from your perspective, but if it's available to people, they will appreciate it. And it's not going to ruin it for people who don't want to turn that feature on, right?
Well, also on the flip side, Rumble could be used for accessibility. For example, like if you're have trouble seeing, but like you have Rumble when an enemy is coming at you or whatever, it would help players that way too. Yeah, so you can use it, you can flip it back the other way too.
Yeah, we always talk about accessibility concerns in terms of things that people are unable to experience. But I think it would help us to think of it in the way you're describing, which is to use alternate ways to improve the experience, right? And then that can bleed over into normal uses. But you're right. Like, I think we talked about with Jajiv a couple weeks ago about different UI elements combining and having this sort of like
redundant.
Yes, that's it. Having these redundant features that provide a richer and more guaranteed experience to what you're doing. And so that totally makes sense. Yeah. For using Rumble for that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, I think all of these things, it's really important to, when you're testing it, you kind of have to think outside yourself a little bit. You have to
Yeah.
kind of imagine, try doing it with a lighter grip on the controller. Try doing it with a really tight grip on the controller. Try doing it with the controller just in one hand, right? Like even if that's not a use case you're expecting, like that can somewhat emulate a use case for someone who has a different control setup.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of considerations, and don't drive yourself crazy and keep in scope, but like it's helpful to at least know that those are possibilities.
Yeah.
And if you can't account for all of them, at least know that you can't.
I think that's a very good point too, because like you can use Rumble as a method to help emphasize a point.
Mhm.
So like for example, when you get hit, it's very important that the player knows that they've taken damage. So we add a lot of visuals to the thing. Maybe we'll add like some freeze frame that you've gotten hit. Your health bar will go down and stuff. There's a lot of things happening. The Rumble also will help with that to help signify that. And a lot of times you can make it like a stronger Rumble so that players will know, oh, dang, something happened. Oh, I got hit.
Yeah. It just like any piece of your design or your aesthetics, it just adds it just adds, right? Adds to it. So if you can find a way for that to work and not overuse it
Yes.
and make it annoying,
Yes.
then you'll be in good shape.
Totally.
Can you believe it? This week's episode of Nice Games Club is sponsored by Codex, the project management tool for game developers made by game developers. It's made by the same team behind the highly rated Curious Expedition. If you've used project management tools in the past, you know that learning a new one can be kind of annoying.
I hate those.
Oh, I kind of like them.
Okay, well, either way, Codex is different. It has a playful, approachable design inspired by trading card games. It uses familiar metaphors like decks and hands so you can quickly organize your tasks, adjust your workflow, assign priority, or whatever else you need to do to manage your total mess of a project.
Hey, be nice.
Codex also has Discord integration, which no other tool of its kind has. Collect feedback, ideas, and bug reports from your community, which you can then lovingly implement or callously ignore as you please. Codex scales to any project, so it's perfect whether you're working alone or with a team of any size. Sign up for free at codex.io/nicegamesclub and get a special introductory offer.
I'm going to spell it out for you. CODECKS.io/nicegamesclub.
Be sure to use that address so we get the credit, and also because we like these people and we want to stay friends with them. Martha?
That's codex.io/nicegamesclub.
Transition time.
So remember before when we were talking about civilization?
No.
Yes, and Mark, you should say yes, and.
Yes, and.
I work so hard on these, you guys.
We know.
So yeah.
Uh-huh.
In different places, I played Civilization different ways.
Civilization, I remember.
Anyway, I want us to talk about video game installations and video games in places.
Yes.
Which,
I get it.
yeah, because the context of where you play a game is important.
Yes.
I mean, we're joking around, but actually a really good way to describe it, in places.
Yeah.
Right? As like a broad way to describe what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, because we, when we were writing up notes for this topic, we realized Stephen was like, this seems real familiar.
Yeah, and I looked in our giant archive because we have over 100. We almost have 150 episodes, y'all. Did y'all I just realized that.
We're a few away.
We might have actually reached that because I don't know if all these are numbered. Anyways, we had a topic like 100 episodes ago about video game installations because Mark had done an installation for the orchestra hall here in Minnesota. Then we talked about that. So I was like, this all looks kind of the same.
So Martha was desperate to come up with a new angle.
Yeah, so I thought, like, really what I wanted to talk more about is, like, games in places, or, like, if you're in the zoo or conservation world, in situ, in the situation that, like, in the context.
Ah, okay.
An in situ animal is an animal that's in its environment, and not in a zoo where it's ex situ. Now you know. Anyway, I work at a cool place. That's why I know these vocab words. Anyway, so like, I was kind of inspired by a local game that happened that your brother Steven's brother Charles worked on.
Yes.
At the Minnesota Institute of Art, that kind of integrated the museum into the game and the art in the museum into the game, and you had to look for clues in the different art pieces, and it made, like, my mom went and played it. I didn't get a chance to, which I feel so bad about.
Yeah.
And such a bummer because it sounds so fun.
I also didn't get a chance to play it.
Steven.
Don't tell my brother. I did play like a knockoff version of it because they had this like party thing, but like part of the museum was like down for renovations, and that was the part that was core to the game. So they had to real quick rush something out. So I played like a knockoff version of it. And
That's so funny. It's really telling. Like the place is so important to the design of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that was called Riddle Mia This, right?
Yes,
the
that's right.
MIA that's a fun pun name. I'm sure you got a kick out of.
That's so cool.
So there were some articles talking about it.
Yeah. My mom said that she loved it a lot because it made her notice. Like, we go to the MIA a lot, me and my mom, to draw different, like we go with our sketchbooks and draw inspired by the art we see. And she said that she saw pieces of art that have always been there, but she just never noticed. But because of they were in the game and she had to look for clues in the game, she noticed them for the first time. And we're like, oh wow, this piece of art is actually really cool. So yeah. And yeah, it's so cool that it was so tied to the place.
Yeah.
That the place being closed meant the game didn't work.
Right.
I think that idea is so interesting and cool. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, how to do that. We talked a little bit about physical games in a previous episode also. Mm-hmm. And some of the games I talked about then were games that were made in that place, and you can't really play them outside of the place. And whenever you come back to the place, you should play the game. Like, we had a game called Skadoons, me and my friend Emily, and it all relied on their staircase. The way it was laid out in their house, right. That you could get on both sides of the staircase and bop balloons back and forth. And we had all this, like, these rhymes that went with the different ways the balloon went. And then Ruby Ball, which is what we played when I was a kid. It's like baseball, but we played it with a wiffle ball. And we would hit the ball, and then my dog Ruby would go and fetch it. And you had the amount of time it took to run around the bases for her, amount of time it took for her to grab the ball and bring it back to run around the bases.
Okay. That's cool.
So you can't really play it without Ruby.
Yeah.
So that game is forever gone now. But, and that's kind of like the thing about these place games is because they're so tied to places, they're kind of time locked too, because like we think about the physical space of things as permanent. And that's why, like, when you're like have a university or something, you can get funding for a new building, no problem. Yeah. Because people think it's like a legacy, like they get to pay for the thing and it's a stone and it never moves and never changes.
Right.
But really, like, the physical landscape around us is changing all the time, and buildings change on the inside all the time.
So many apartments.
Right.
They won't stop.
So, like, these games will disappear when the place disappears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, or it'll be adapted. So think of like staging a play. Like you have a different production of the play in another theater. And so presumably games could work like that too. Like imagine a lot, a codex of games like a Shakespeare folio that has essentially the rules, but then is free to be interpreted by a director in a new place.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
I think there are probably more moving parts, and there's no language for us to describe these things. But like, imagine a future where you had things you could pull, you could license, if it was a commercial work, or if it was in the public domain, you could just, get access to and then stage it, right? Like, stage it in the back alley of your neighborhood, or stage it at the local community center or something, and then use that space and then invent new things around it. Like, I don't know why, it's not a radical idea. I don't know why that hasn't been done so much before. A lot of times, if it's a game you have made and you take it around to different conventions, you will do a little bit of that process anyway. Yeah. But I think a lot of times is because these are not they're generally grant funded, if funded at all. And so they tend to be impermanent, like you described, because no one really thinks about giving it a further life.
Well, I imagine that like the space. I think we're doing a little bit of that sort of stuff already.
Mhm.
I know that like in the previous episode we talked about, was it Johann Sebastian Joust?
Yeah.
Well, imagine if you were playing that game, but like you couldn't move this table that was in the center of the room.
Right.
That would change the game quite a bit. Like
Mhm.
you'd have to manipulate. You have to move around that table.
Yeah.
And so it would change a bunch of things. So like I think there are some games that are explicitly sort of designed for whatever space they're in.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, but like I think that like the way you were describing it sounds more like you literally designed a game that can be literally amorphous in that like it is very specific about what space it needs to be in. And so I'm kind of imagining almost more like one of those plays you have to participate in, like they say, hey, give us a thing. And it'd be like, I don't know.
You mean improv?
That's more like improv, yeah. I guess I'm imagining improv, but like more like everybody's actually participating in it as a game sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The way you were describing it anyways, that's the impression I got. And that sounded like a really fascinating idea.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to be as broad or generalized. So think of like a play that you see on a stage versus a play you see in the round.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be different. The blocking is going to be different, but the script is going to be the same.
Yeah.
And so why can't games work that way as well, where like a part of the game it uses light projection on this big wall in this theater space. It's so perfect for it.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're doing it in this other space where the ceilings are so low that we can't do it that way. Okay, well, we're going to put it on the floor now, and then that has gameplay implications.
Yeah.
So we change the rules a little bit so that works. Like it could still be the same game, right? It could still refer back to the founding document and be correct, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's a lot of work.
I mean, sure, but like that sounds really cool. I think so.
That all reminds me of the Children's Theater one year did a version of Romeo and Juliet where instead of in the round, you're literally on this, like they built the streets of Verona or whatever, and this huge like wraparound set, and then you were people just walking around, and then the play happened in around you, like people walking by would just suddenly be like, "Why art thou?"
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that was super cool.
Mm-hmm.
And that like now we're getting real philosophical, but plays kind of are like games. Like they have rules and roles and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like turn off your cell phones.
Well, like the
I mean, that's not what you meant, but
like the way to play the game is to sit and watch it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it has a language of like how it's presented. You act on stage to the cheap seats. Like it has all those things are defined, and then depending on where the place is, or let's say maybe you have a PA system and all the actors are mic'd. Well, now the performances are different, or can be different. So yeah, you're right. It does. They have design constraints and rules.
One thing that is one genre of games that we've also talked about on the show before with one of our nice guests, our nice guest Art, was all about escape rooms, which is basically kind of like a play, except you become the actors in the play trying to figure out the puzzle.
That's a good example of something you're talking about.
Art actually has described how his business Riddle Room has taken a puzzle that he's created and moved it to different spaces in it as other things as time goes on, right? And then they need to modify it a little bit, and the room is larger, so it can accommodate more people, which means they can have a more complicated puzzle or stuff like that. And so that might be the closest thing to what I'm describing.
Yeah,
not quite the same as but even Riddle Room concepts or puzzle room concepts are licensable, right? A lot of times they will make it available to purchase so some other business can run it.
Okay.
So that's actually close.
Yeah. Fascinating.
And they're very much tied to place. Like the whole thing is about spaces and volume, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know there's that local, locally developed thing called the Donutron that we have that is, I guess, is like it has a bunch of locally made games and like a little arcade machine. But it's like donut themed. I don't think any of the games are donut themed.
No,
but like the Donutron itself is donut themed, and
it has its own personality, and identity.
Yeah, and it would be weird to have that in a place that wasn't Glam Doll Donuts. It'd be weird to have that here. Actually, it'd be weird to have that at Glitch because You don't sell donuts.
Although,
Unless.
And so like it is the thing that is like was designed explicitly for the purpose of that venue. I don't think it's the exact same thing because like it's our outside theming matches the venue.
Well, I mean, it's an illustration of how this idea can be done small.
Yeah,
it can be like there are local games on there. They weren't intended to be played publicly or on an arcade machine. But in that space with that identity on that little machine, that is interesting.
Yeah,
it can be recontextualized.
Yeah, and now that I think about it, an example of that it fits in a different kind of space is the Mega Mini Multi Indie Mini Arcade. Because it's very similar to the Donutron in that like there are a bunch of locally made indie games here.
Yeah,
but it's specifically designed so that like people who aren't as familiar with the games but are like interested in like the business aspect of it can see a bunch of different games really quickly.
Right. So that's like if you show off a game at a convention or something like we've done, you have your own booth. Runs your game.
Right.
But what you're describing, the many words I'm not going to say, that is many stations that all have all the games.
Yeah.
And that's at the mini bar every year, which is a convention here. It's a sort of tech meets small business kind of one-day conference. And that's been going on a couple of years, that arcade setup. Right. And you're right. It is different and has a different character.
And it's explicitly designed, like it has Ian, who... builds it every year. He asks all of the developers to send trailers of the game because like it also shows like a preview of the game. Yeah. Whereas I believe the Donutron does not do that. I think it just has a bunch of games on it that you can just play. So like it's explicitly designed for people to draw people in, as opposed to the Donutron, which is more like an installation of the space.
Yes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the multi-mini indie arcade is always kind of in the place where people walk by. Like it was designed to be in the middle of a lot of stuff happening at once. And so that makes a lot of sense. It was designed for its place also. Yeah. So I guess all my notes are for the old version of this topic.
Well, as a result of that, you can use that information and maybe use that for showing your game off at whatever space you're going to. So like you might, if you're showing your game off at GDC, you might tailor your demo space differently than if you were to show your game off at PAX, for example.
Right. Like, are you trying to make connections with other developers so you can work together on a future project?
Right.
In which case you're demoing your game for that purpose. Or if you're at PAX and you're trying to sell some games.
Yeah.
Right. It's as a different, you can, sometimes there are just blank spaces you fill, but like, contextually they're very different in terms of like what type of event it is or what type, or if it's at a semi-permanent space like the Donutron, like it has a different, or if it's a place you're going to be to present versus a place where it needs to run on its own. Yeah. Or a third party is going to present and where you are not, like a lot of considerations. And that's just for just regular games. Yeah. Right. That's not even designing your game for those spaces. Right. And there's still a ton of considerations. Right.
Yeah. That's a good point.
I can't even imagine. Like, now I'm thinking about that. Like, if we were to make a game in the clubhouse for the clubhouse, how would we go about doing that? The clubhouse is, I don't know that we've ever like described it.
So it's true. It's a triangle shaped room, made out of brick and filled with love. And it has one glass wall that is that it shares with the rest of the space here at Glitch. Yeah, and so it's the end of the Glitch space. Yeah, and then on the other wall is a number of windows that go out onto Riverside Avenue. Yeah,
all very bouncy surfaces. So.
Yes, not great for recording audio. Right. We've learned, but we figured it out. Yeah, we have a big wall-to-wall whiteboard on one of the walls. We have LED lighting or fluorescent style lighting. So it's very cool lighting in here. Yeah. We have a couple of plants. We have a blow up Portal 2 drone. And we've got a big table in the middle where we record the show.
It's also a whiteboard table so we can draw on it.
Right. And then this room is normally used as a conference space, and it's really useful for that. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we use it as our clubhouse. Mm-hmm. So that's the summary.
The lay of the land, yes.
So what would we make here?
Man, I really want to use something with the glass wall.
Yeah.
I feel like it's easy to like draw little notes and stuff on the whiteboards we have, but like the glass wall. Oh, Martha's got an idea.
Okay, so with a glass wall.
Yeah.
this is a conference room.
Yes.
Okay, so players are outside.
Uh-huh.
There are like
inside-outside dynamic.
yeah,
Okay.
and there are NPCs, we shall call them, inside.
Okay.
And
trained improv actors.
yes, and they are having some like there's some sort of scene, like some sort of meeting that's happening or something, and then they have to figure out clues if I'm outside. I don't know that's just the idea that popped in my
dang.
head.
I like that as a genre.
Yeah.
Like staging a tableau and you can even have the actors mouth their lines, like not actually speak.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so you have the players outside, and they would have some sort of way to interact, right? Either writing on the walls in dry erase marker, or some sort of buttons that were something you build, and then the people inside would be doing their scene, and then the players outside could change either what happens in the scene, like maybe they're like scientists in a nuclear reactor and they're trying to figure out how to solve a thing. The players could either assist with that, or it could be a matter of the players just trying to deduce what's happening in the scene. And if they do something right, then the actors then are aware of it, and then they start talking for real, as if you turned on the speakers or something. Like you could make it as a solving a mystery where the play in the room plays out. It's black box theater, right?
Yeah.
It could just play out normally, but then how the audience perceives it changes based on their attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could just have puzzles on the windows that you could have to connect dots that are drawn on both sides of the window. Like, I'm really excited about this. But like dressing up this space as if it were another space and using it, and then having that wall-to-wall window is really exciting, as you described.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. It could be that you're like, there's one person on the inside who knows you're there, and you're trying to like get them information, and they're trying to like give you clues or something, but how would that work? I don't know. Maybe not.
Communication is interesting, right? So you'd have the performer inside. Maybe they act as though they can't hear you, or can't hear you and can't see you. Mm-hmm. And then you need to do something to let them see you or hear you, either by like tapping out a particular code and that you would determine by deducing things that are written on the walls in here, or manipulating things that would like turn on an intercom system, or something like that.
What if it was like a one-way mirror sort of situation? The way you were describing it made me remind me of a one-way mirror.
Oh,
which you could do it. Yeah, just even make it like a police interrogation kind of setup, or a lineup, or things that where the glass wall is familiar. You could even do like a Hannibal Lecter cell kind of scenario.
Yeah, we could do that. Wow, there's a lot of options for this thing. Yeah, this is really cool.
And what makes it different from, you could have digital components or interactive elements,
right?
But what ties it to a place would be the use of a live actor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And like, actually, the area we're in has a lot of theaters around it.
Yeah.
So like we could find actors, and like we can maybe, this is getting way in.
Well,
this is a huge scope sort of thing.
So we're in the theater district in Minneapolis.
Right.
There are a lot of theaters, and every year there's a Fringe Fest that puts on many small plays.
Yeah.
And occasionally they do special engagements at other locations in the area.
Oh.
So that's a thought.
Okay, that's a fascinating concept. It would be neat to like
jot that down on a Post-it.
Right? It would be neat to be like work with local actors and get them to like, perform here in that way that we were talking about.
Well, and those, if you had performance, they become a real big part of the artistry of the thing. They become, you can't just give them a script and a bunch of branching dialogue trees. Like they would have to be, have a lot of say in what it is.
Yeah.
For them to be able to actually engage with it properly.
Okay. So if they were like really had, like everything down pat, and their characters and what they say, you could do like, in games where you can like rewind time, like scrub through a.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
But you could do that in real life. So you could be like walking around with the people in here, and then be like, pause, rewind.
Oh, that's interesting.
Start.
Oh.
And like
fascinating.
Get clues.
And notice something new the second time around, or maybe something's a little different this time around.
Okay.
Ooh, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Like in a puzzle room, a lot of times you're like, I'm going to work on this, you work on that, let's stay in communication.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a big part of being a successful puzzle room team.
Right.
Also like a very irritating one if you're just there to just goof off. But like something like that would work similarly. Like you need to pay attention to what the actor's doing here, because there's so much else going on that we haven't been able to do that. So you need to ignore all the interesting stuff and focus on that.
Yeah.
and then you can run it as many times as you need to, right? Like if there's a rewind mechanic.
Wow, yeah, that's cool. Oh, maybe.
Yeah.
That would be really cool. I like this idea a lot. Let's do it.
Well, this has been a really fun exercise.
Yes.
But and I don't mind continuing, but I think listeners should do something like this. Think about either the space you're in, or just even as a thought exercise, if not necessarily a game jam thing, although that's a great idea. And get your mind turning about how you would use a space. And then those ideas, you could then move to some other thing. You could adapt those for a digital game or whatever. But it's a kind of brainstorming that's sort of interesting that we haven't really done before.
Yeah. We could maybe do a whole Nice Games Jam episode on it, too.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Where we flesh these ideas out more.
Mm-hmm.
That's our show. If you haven't already, subscribe to Nice Games Club in your favorite podcast app and be sure to give it a good review if you liked it or are nice like us. We really do need to know you're out there, so leave a review and tell all your friends too. We also want to hear directly from you, so follow us on Twitter and all the other things at Nice Games Club, where you can hear from Dale, who is doing a good job on the Twitter. She's doing great. And you can also email us at contact@nicegames.club. Lastly, you can find out more about the show and your nice hosts, as well as get all of the links and show notes from this and other episodes at nicegames.club.
So until we start again, remember to
play nice
and make nice. Yet, and everything's happy-go-lucky.
Mm-hmm.